Welcome back to our reading of the scriptures. It's the Apostle Paul who said, study to show thyself a workman who need not be ashamed of himself, rightly dividing the word of truth. I've never understood why we and people believe that ignorance of scriptures is some kind of virtue. Ignorance is never a virtue. And the more you can know the scriptures and know the word of God, especially the examples, as Paul says, the Old Testament was given to us to be examples for us to follow, that we can learn how God responds to our actions and how we have a cycle of falling away again and again. Well, then sometimes we're going through things we don't understand. And the wisdom of God, we say, God, why are you letting these horrible things happen to me? Well, that's what the book of Job is really all about. So we pick up our reading this week, Job chapter 25 to 37. Now, after Job's 5-chapter monologue, that is from chapter 27 to 31, you'll have to kind of swim through that. A young man, the youngest of all the friends, Elihu, enters, and he gives some fresh perspective, and which is basically more accurate than that was offered by his other three friends, Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar. And so in chapters 32 to 37, Elihu, basically a young man, so he's been quiet, want to be respectful of the older guys. But he tells Job that, Job, you need to humble yourself. You need to submit to God's wisdom, because this is a playground between the ears of God. You don't want to play because you don't have an infinite mind. Chapter 27, Job falls into what we mentioned before. And we keep attempting to defend ourselves and saying, God, this isn't right. This isn't fair. I don't deserve this. What we're really falling into is, again, self-righteousness. Now, he begins to lament. Job begins to lament because he's not finding wisdom or answers, nor is he really asking for wisdom. He just wants to complain. It would be helpful if he had read James 1:5. And by the way, like I said, many believe that James was inspired by Job in this particular section. See, it's one thing to be humbled. It's another thing to be humiliated. When God permits you to be in a situation that is really painful for one's ego, you have a choice. You can embrace it and say, God, I want to learn what it is that you want me to learn from this suffering. Or you can fight it and attack it, and in self-righteousness, be humiliated. Really, whether it's being humbling or humiliated, it's really your own choice. If you want to get angry, you'll be humiliated. If you want to be humbled, you'll embrace it and seek God's favor and his wisdom. Again, the promise of James 1:5. Well, this is when we assert our own righteousness and we begin to look for blame. And when we start looking for blame for the bad things happening to us, eventually we end up with blaming God. Well, again, it's Elihu, the youngest of Job's friends, who has the greater wisdom here. And he rebukes Job again for his self-righteousness. And he vindicates God's justice. The sovereignty of God lies, again, like I said, within his infinite wisdom. This reading this week was a scorcher. And I know this probably made you have to think about even the prayer of Psalmist 139, verse 23, 24. Remember, he prayed this: Search me, O God, and know my heart. Try and know my thoughts, and see if there be any wicked way in me. Lead me into the everlasting way. We're all just like Job. Job never betrayed, never walked away from God, but he really had his honest questions, and he's really hurting here, and he's being very honest about what he is not happy about. So what's the resolution of this whole thing? Believe it or not, it's not going to be why good people suffer. That's not going to be the answer. You're going to find next week in your reading, you'll find a resolution to this whole thing. And we'll pick it up next week as we move from Job 38, and we'll move into the book of Ecclesiastes, chapter 10. And we'll talk about it next week. God bless you. Stay faithful to your reading. Bye-bye.